as we get started this morning, just want to ask you, have you ever had one of those, like, how did I get here type of moments? I don't know, maybe you're experiencing that this morning here in church. You're like, how did I get here? What sequences of my life brought me to this moment? And that's kind of what that is, right? That how did I get here moment, right? What am I doing here? It's right. It's marked usually by a space where you pause for a moment and you look up and you're like, what's going on? I have many of those moments in my life, but I distinctly remember one about 10 years ago, earlier on a Friday morning. It was 2015, and I was working that morning, cleaning pools. First pool of the day, and I remember being focused, right, trying to get through my schedule, because I had an evening flight that day to fly out to Georgia, because we were going to have a baby shower celebrating the upcoming birth for Ren. She'd already left town. I'm trying to get through my schedule so I can leave. So first pool of the day, I get there, not more than 5 minutes into it. I'm at the back of my truck, kind of pulling chemicals out, and this lady pulls up in a vehicle, and she's obviously pretty upset, right? There's tears running down her eyes. I hear a baby in the back seat crying, and she's clearly great with child. And she says she really needs to use my phone, right? She left hers at home. And me being the genius that I am, I just like, sure, right? I mean, she's clearly needs some help here. So I pass her the phone, and I didn't want to be awkward, kind of stand there. She makes her phone call. I tell her, I'll be right back, right? I got to go back and set some things with the pump, and I'll be back in a few minutes. So I come back in a few minutes, and she passes me the phone back. She's kind of gained some composure, and she thanks me. She says, thank you. The cops are on their way now. And then she left. And so I'm sitting there, right, in this very affluent neighborhood, knowing that the cops are coming, and that call came from my phone. I have no idea what just happened. And so it turns out this lady had been run off the road, and she followed the driver to the house I was working at. All right, and I mean, it's a large property. I didn't see anybody speed into a driveway or a back alley. And so within minutes, there are multiple cops there, and they're asking me questions, right? This was my quiet morning, right? I'm getting started, still sipping my coffee, and all of a sudden I got cops there asking me what I'm doing here, what's going on, and I'm at a loss for words. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. This woman just came up and asked for my phone. And they're like, well, why does your phone call 911? What's going on? And so I had one of those, like, how did I get here type of moments, right? I got pulled into this situation, and like, literally, like, this just all elevated within a few minutes. It was a how did I get here type of moment. What happened? And we've all experienced that before, sometimes on a scale like that, but sometimes a little deeper in life. And what happens inevitably when we hit those type of moments, right? How did I get here? We begin asking other questions, particularly of God. And sometimes the question will look like this: God, not only how did I get here, but what are you doing here? Why am I going through the issue that I'm going through? Right? Why am I going through this painful job loss or this challenging transition? Why was I laid off? God, why am I going through this divorce or this painful relational fallout? God, what am I doing here, sitting in the hospital with this cancer diagnosis? God, what is going on? The crop prices have not gone up, but my expenses sure have. It's going to be rough this year. God, what are you doing? Maybe you have an event that just completely changes your life, and before you realize it elevates so fast, you have a what are you doing here type of moment with God, right? How did I get here? What are you doing? And within all of us is a need for some sense of feeling regarding what God is doing in this world and in our world, right? We just want to know, because that sometimes makes it a little easier, right? God, what are you doing through this situation? Again, I think it makes it so much easier for us to walk through a hard season of life if we just at least knew the reason why. But when life takes to an uncertain place, it can be hard to move forward, right? You hit that wall and you don't know what is coming up next. And this is particularly hard when you've just read the first 2 chapters of Ecclesiastes. Because if all is vanity, right, nothing is going to last, how do we move forward in the face of uncertainty, right? What is even the point of moving forward? Right, that's kind of what I want us to wrestle with, right? If all is vanity, if we're going to be forgotten in a generation or two, if all of our toil is going to be passed on to the next generation and probably squandered, right? These are great, encouraging messages. Solomon lets us know in the first 2 chapters of Ecclesiastes. If all is vanity, if all is futile, how do we move forward? And the secondary question is, what's the point of moving forward? So if you would, grab your Bible and turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. That's where we're going to be at this morning. And this is kind of the underlying question that Solomon is answering through our text this morning. I'll have it up on our screen so you can follow along. But I always think it's better as you open up in your word, you can see it, you can kind of see the flow a little better, because sometimes just the nature of our conversation is we kind of fracture it. And so I really want you to see the flow of the conversation he's making here. So we are in chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes, working through the entire book in this series I entitled Making Life Work, or in really many ways, making your life matter. And if this is your first time, or you're just now kind of paying attention, Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. It's known as a piece of wisdom literature. And it's believed he wrote this as he was kind of getting up there in age. Remember, he's the king of a nation. He's one of the most wisest men who've ever lived. Now he's writing out his thoughts, his observations about how mankind works, how life works. And he really is intending for us, as we read this, to consider what in life is worth pursuing. How shall our effort be focused or spent? So what I want to do first is read the first 8 verses of Ecclesiastes. Maybe a pretty familiar passage for you. In fact, I was at a funeral yesterday. This passage came up. So I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to discuss what Solomon is doing here and why we say that based upon what comes next. So Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1 through 8. He starts out, "For everything there is a season, and a time for heaven to be, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." And a time for my microphone to cut out. We're going to get that worked out at some point. First 8 verses of Ecclesiastes. We're going to come back to that in a moment, because I kind of want to set us up with what I believe Solomon wants us to see here in these first 8 verses. So I'm going to ask you guys a question that might show your age. How many of you guys know what a Betamax tape is? Anybody? Anybody familiar? There we go, some honesty. I know you guys know what it is. All right, that is not a Betamax tape. That is a VHS tape. Now, I am old enough to know what that is. That's what I grew up watching movies on, right? That is like the older version of a DVD, which even kids nowadays don't know what a DVD is. But here's the story with Betamax versus VHS. There was a little bit of a battle going on in the 70s, kind of for market dominance. And Betamax was developed by Sony, and it was introduced in 1975. A year earlier than JVC introduced the VHS tape. And you guys are like, this is really boring, Justin. But here's the thing. You would think if someone introduced a product first, they would have market dominance, market superiority, particularly when the Betamax tape was known for having a superior recording quality. But none of us know what a Betamax tape is, let alone probably even a VHS tape. So what made the VHS tape win out over the Betamax tape? We see Sony was really their licensing of this product. And so it was really hard and kind of expensive for people to put film onto the Betamax tapes. JVC was more free and more open with the licensing, and so they got access to the market. More people had it, more people bought VHS players, and they just kind of developed this dominance in the market until Betamax was a foregone thing. In fact, I think it's wild. I've never seen my parents' wedding because they taped it on a Betamax. I remember seeing the thing there, and I've never seen it. I don't even know if they got married. Here's the thing. What we see here is a missed opportunity. Ultimately, the issue that happened between Sony getting their product onto the market was an issue of timing. They had the opportunity to get their product in the market in a large scale early on, but they missed out and they got beat. They missed the timing, right? Knowing the time changes everything. It gives you a different perspective on life. And so as we talk about moving forward sometimes in the face of a challenging season, if all is vanity, how do we move forward? Well, one of the most important things for us to understand is the time, right? Know the time. There's your first blank. You see, in the first 8 verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, we have a poem that is recorded for us that gets us to acknowledge this issue of timing. Now, what is the focus of this first 8 verses? What does Solomon want us to see? Well, I'm not a genius, but if you read through there, what word comes up a lot? Time. In fact, he kind of establishes at the very beginning there in verse 1, he says, for everything there is a season, a zaman, right? That's in the Hebrew, a focus upon time. So what he says is that in everything, there is a start and stop time to things in life. There is an appointed time. And so I want you to kind of notice, we're not going to read through it again, but notice the contrasting ideas. You see start to stop. You see something begin and something end. Two opposite things. And he begins there in verse 2. There's a time to be born and a time to die. Right? It's that dash between your life, right? The day you're born to the day you die. And from there, it's all these other activities that follow. There is an appointed time, right, for us to be born, and there is an appointed time for us to die. And in between there are a lot of life events, to weep and to laugh, to mourn, to dance. You kind of see it continue on through there in the other few verses. A time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. Keep going down. This is important for us. A time to keep silent, and a time to speak. Time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time. Solomon writes this 8-verse poem and lets us know, right, life is composed of all these divinely appointed times. Life is composed of these things. And again, he uses this poem to illustrate something about our lives, to make us ask a question. If all of these things are appointed seasons in our life, who or what appoints these seasons? Who or what appoints these seasons of our life? Is it us that have control over all of these things, or is it God? How many of us had control over the day and year in which we were born? None of us. Right? Many of us have no control over some of the things going on in our life. Certainly, we sometimes add to it, we contribute to it, but the reality is there are a lot of things in our life we have no control over. We have limited to no control sometimes over that job loss. We have no control over that diagnosis, right? We have no control over that relational fallout. Sometimes we do, certainly yes. But more times than not, we have zero control over some of these seasons of our life. And so that should lead us to ask another question. Who appoints the time for these things? The Sunday school answer, God does. And if he does, then why does he appoint these things that happen in our life? Why does he, many of us would ask, why does he make that season last so long? You see, the first 8 verses of our text, we read them regularly at funerals. We read them sometimes during times of distress. And we don't read it as an attempt to explain away painful things. But rather, it's to make us realize the limited scope of our life and the lack of control that we have over many of these items. And so that's why, right, as you might be going through something this morning, asking yourself the question, how do I move forward? It's important to know the time you are living in, because we can get frustrated with the events of our lives, right? We ask God the question, why am I dealing with this? How long do I have to endure this? And usually the biggest one for me is, what are you doing with this situation, God? I don't normally do this, but when you read through Ecclesiastes, early on he establishes this theme of vanity And here in chapter 3, he now establishes a secondary theme of time, right? Knowing the time. And if you were to skip forward to chapter 8, I want to introduce this to you real quick. He makes this statement: the wise heart will know the proper what? The proper time, right? And the just way. So the wise person knows what time it is, and they know the best course of action on how to apply it. See, timing and patience are difficult, right? Maybe you are going through a season today that is challenging and that is trying and that is completely out of your control. And so trusting the one who appoints these times can be challenging, but if you understand the time and understand his sovereignty in it, it does make it easier, though it doesn't necessarily explain why. God has all of us exactly where we are at for a reason: to seek his wisdom on how to live. This phrase comes up multiple times in Ecclesiastes, right? Living under the sun, life under the sun. It's really just talking about the entirety of your life. And so whatever you're walking through this morning, God has you there for a very specific reason. And that kind of sets us up for the next section of our text. So first blank there, right? Know the time. Now, when I first moved to the city, I had met a pastor in Strasbourg, and we went out for lunch at La Casina down in York. I love it. And afterward, he wanted to introduce me to the pastor there at Arbor Drive. And so we kind of meet in the parking lot. He says, I'll meet you over at the church. And so I don't know where it's at. I look up Arbor something in my GPS, and I follow the address, which brought me to a church just a couple miles south of town. Now, I get there after about 15 minutes of driving, and no one is there. And I get a call from this pastor. He said, hey, where are you at? I said, I'm out here at the church. Where are you? He's like, you're not out there. I'm literally in the parking lot. I do not see you. And I realized that, and you guys already know this, I went to Arborville Congregational Church, not Arbor Drive. I had the wrong place. Right? Getting the place right is important. Right? It's not just about knowing the time, but it's also kind of knowing the place that God has you. And so if all is vanity, how do we move forward, right? We need to know the time, understanding who appoints that time, and have a little context for maybe why we're in the time. And the next item there is knowing the place. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 9 through 11. Solomon says, right after this poem on time, shifting back, what gain has the worker from his toil? Right? He's now shifting back to this idea, this theme of toil, our labor, everything we do in the sun. We covered that last week. And he begins to reflect upon what is permanent and what is lasting. So he continues in verse 10 through 11. I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I think that's kind of an interesting observation that Solomon makes here, right? In verse 10, he's like, hey, I've been around for a while. I've observed some things. And in these observations there in verse 11, he makes two notes I want to draw your attention to. First off, he lets us know that God, in his time, right? Remember, this is an older man who has been watching the world for a while. And his observation is that he has made everything beautiful in its time. Yahweh in the Hebrew can be translated, he has made everything appropriate or everything proper. And what this means is that God is putting the pieces of our lives together in some way for some reason. Even that ugly situation you're in, that challenging valley that you're going through, God takes that and he makes it into something good. Now, the problem is we don't know the time. We don't know his timetable. We don't know if this is something you're going to walk through for a month or until your life ends. But Solomon's observation is that God will make things right. He will make things proper. The next thing I want you to notice there in verse 11 is that he realizes that God, right, he has put eternity into man's heart. Right? We as human beings, right, whether you believe God exists or not, every one of us intuitively know there's got to be something more beyond this life. We know there's more to life than what we can see. Solomon makes that observation, yet he makes this follow-up statement, yet, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So God enables us to realize there's more to life than what we see, yet we cannot know God's ultimate purposes. No matter how much we long to know how our lives kind of fit into this grand plan he has, Solomon lets us know we won't know. We might have some glimpses at times, have some ideas, but we have no clue what God is doing in this world. And since we don't know the time or the reason for it, this is what Solomon recommends. Verse 12, I have perceived, and we brought this up last week, this comes up multiple times here in our text, that there is, and get this, right, nothing better. There is nothing better. What is he talking about? There's nothing better, right, for man than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. Right? This isn't a statement of fatalism, like there's nothing better to do but eat, drink, and be merry. What he's saying is that God has blessed us with so many things, and even though we're concerned about how God is fitting them together, God has blessed us in the moment. And he says that life is to be enjoyed. God has a plan that is leading somewhere. But ultimately, what we're experiencing often in this world is God's gracious gift to us. There's nothing better than to enjoy the good stuff of life. That's what he's saying. This is God's gift to us. Right? The good stuff. A fun evening with your family, right? That laughter. There's nothing better than working and saving up some money and going on that vacation. Having that hobby. Enjoying that meal with friends. Right? Things and experiences aren't bad, contrary to maybe what you got out of the first few chapters of Ecclesiastes. Right? That is the good stuff of life. But what he's saying here is that these things and experiences are fantastic. They are God's gifts to us, but they're not meant to be the pursuit of our life. They're just meant to be enjoyed as gifts that are given to us. Why is Solomon telling us all of this? We don't know how long we will live. We don't know how long someone will be in our lives. We don't know how long we'll have our health and the ability to enjoy the things that God has put in our life, to travel and take part in hobbies. Because as many of us know, life changes. We go through different seasons of life, some longer than others, some seemingly permanent. Bad things happen. But here's the thing, Ecclesiastes 14 through 15. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, and that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. Now, if you read through that and you think Dr. Seuss wrote that, take a second look at what he's saying there. God is sovereign, right? Whatever God does endures forever, right? He knows the end picture, right? He has eternity in mind. Nothing can be added, nothing can be taken away from it. Right? This is so that we can fear him, not in a scared fear, but in a respect. This is someone who is more powerful, who has more insight and knowledge than us, yet who genuinely loves us and has the best for us. That which is already has been, and that which will be already has been, right? You kind of see that language there that Solomon is poetically using in this piece of wisdom literature. God is sovereign, and he has sovereignly worked things out. And going back there to the last section we looked at, he makes all things beautiful, right? He has a plan that is leading somewhere, and we are to fear him and to trust his sovereignty. So know the time, right? We might not know how long we're in a season, but know that whatever season you are in, this is appointed by God. But also know the place. Recognize the place God has you right now. Because sometimes we lose perspective on what is permanent and what is lasting, right? We can become so fixated on gathering things and having experiences that we miss out on the fact that these are things are meant to be enjoyed. They are gifts from our eternal sovereign God. Life is temporary, but it's meant to be enjoyed. We don't know why things happen, when they do, or why they do. But what Solomon tells us is that we have a God who is sovereign, who is making all things beautiful. And so the situation you find yourself in, whether it's one of joy or sadness, it is intentional on God's part. This is what Solomon lets us know, yet entirely unknown to us. And that is probably one of the hardest things to rectify, too, when you are going through a painful situation, asking that why question. And so this is meant to give us a sense of hope, assurance that God is going to take that and make that beautiful. It fits in somewhere we just don't know right now. And so since we have some idea of the timing, some idea of the place, the best thing that we can do as we go through these ups and downs of life is that we know the Creator. That's really the call of the final verses in our text. We're going to skip through these a little quicker. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 16. Moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. So Solomon's observation is that there is injustice where justice should be found. Right? There are people who go through things of no fault of their own, and they're dealing with some hard stuff. Right? The same image, almost like of a court, right, of a corrupt judge where you should be able to find justice. Instead, you find wickedness. Solomon says this is how the world works. Some of these appointed times and seasons are of no fault to your own, but you are dealing with the ups and downs of life, and you are an appointed season by God, and we have no idea how he's working this out. So he makes that observational statement. But here's the place where we should find some hope. Verse 17. I said in my heart, God will judge. Right? God will judge. He will deal, right, with the righteous and the wicked. For there is a time for every matter and for every work. Right? God will deal with the sin and the brokenness in the world, not on our timetable, but on his. God sees the wickedness, and he will judge. He sees the righteous, and there will be judgment as well, both ends of the spectrum. Last few verses, 18 through 19. I'm going to read through this pretty quick, and then I'll kind of talk to you about what he's discussing. He said this, verse 18, I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. What happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantages over the beast for all his vanity. All go to one place, all are from dust, and to dust all return. And here's kind of the rhetorical question here. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? What is he saying there? Is he saying that there is no eternity, there is nothing after this life? No, what he's noting is that we, in this space of our life, from the time we were born to the time we were death, life under the sun, we are in many ways like the animals. Not that we are to act like animals, but we are finite like the animals. See there in verse 19, as one dies, so dies the other, right? We're returning back to dust. And seemingly the same result. But as we know, that's not the same result. There's more to this life than what we see. Verse 22, last verse. He makes this observational statement, acknowledging eternity, but bringing us back to life under the sun, says this. So I saw that there is nothing better than that he should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Here's a call here to enjoy life under the sun, to enjoy life, to trust that God will deal with wickedness, that God will deal with injustice, that God sees and acknowledges the time you're living in, the challenging place that he's put you in, and it's a call to trust him in what he's doing here. It's a call to understand that he's eternal and that he is in control, and that he controls eternity. And frankly, even among the brokenness of the world, there is much to enjoy. There's a lot he has blessed us with. Sometimes it's important for us, again, to acknowledge the time and the place, but what's most important was he acknowledged the Creator who made us. So Solomon doesn't really answer the question of why, but rather he points us to a who. Right? We don't know why we go through the things we go through, but he does point us to someone that we can trust. And so while you might sit in the midst of an uncertain and unknown time, and it's hard, we don't know the future, but there is a God that we can know who does know the future, and that's what he's calling us to recognize. Enjoy this life, yes, but trust the God of the universe who says there is more to this life and he is worthy of being trusted. Now that experience I started out with, I shared with you, where I was at a property and the cops got called and I swore I was going to go to jail. I was like, I'm in a very nice neighborhood here and I'd stick out. That did something for my heart that day. Because you see, I'd been doing that job for about a year at that point, and I really dealt with some serious envy of a lot of these individuals. You see, it was hard, right? I'm showing up there eating my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every single day, right? Barely figuring out how to pay my school bill and how to pay, our rent that month, and we were expecting a baby of all things as well. And I remember just struggling with envy. I'm like, these guys don't have a problem in the world. I mean, look at this house, it's huge. And I quickly realized that, in fact, things aren't as good as they seem for them. And what's wild is I literally Googled this man's name who owned that property. I Googled it the other day. He's done TED Talks. He's been on Dr. Phil, Good Morning America, Fox News. He's sold many books. To live in that neighborhood, he's a multi-millionaire. And seemingly everything in life is going well, but there I had an inside perspective of how dysfunctional his life really was. In fact, unbeknownst to me, he was going through a pretty bad divorce. And his son was racing home to collect some belongings before his dad got there and took some stuff. And that's how he ran that lady off the road, right? And I'm just there to clean the pool, man. And I get drawn into all this. And so God uses that moment in my life to check my heart, to make me realize maybe all of this isn't as good as it seems. Right? I realized that there was nothing to that envious heart I had. It wasn't as good as it seemed. And maybe that's, again, what God's doing in your life as well, bringing you through something to grow you, to challenge you. And if not for you, maybe for someone else. But here's the thing, we don't know how long we'll be in those seasons. We don't know why we're there, but we can trust the person who has placed us there. How do we move forward in life? We know the time, we know the place, and we know the Creator. 2 questions that help us kind of this week as we wrestle with this. And understandably, as you go through Ecclesiastes, feel a little unstructured, but there is a thought flow to it. Hopefully you're kind of following as we go through each chapter here. But 2 questions. When have you recently found yourself frustrated with the events of your life? How does your relationship with the Creator impact this frustration? Let's bow our heads in a word of prayer. God, as we gather this morning, man, we are all in a different place today, Lord. Some of us are experiencing the highs of life. Some of us are sitting with some pretty heavy stuff. And God, I pray that as we looked at this, even though many of us are asking why, we tend to do that more in the low parts of life. God, what Solomon lets us know is we might never know. We might never get a glimpse as to what you're doing, but rather we're called to trust you, to trust your sovereignty, to trust your love for us, and to trust that you will make things right. And so, God, I pray for those who are going through a challenging season. Lord, may they know you. May they have an interaction with Christ. May they commit their lives to following him so that they may know you. And Lord, I pray for each and every one of us, Lord, that even in the midst of looking toward eternity, Lord, that we can enjoy the things that you put in our lives, Lord, our families, the things we've worked for. And Lord, enjoy those things really as an expression of worship toward you. God, we love you. Thank you for this passage. And thank you, Lord, for just, again, your sovereignty of having it preserved for us so that we could read it today in Polk, Nebraska. Because, Lord, it's just as applicable now as it was when Solomon wrote it. We love you. And, Lord, may you bless us this week. In your name, amen.